Cars used to suck. I mean, for like the first 30 years, they were garbage. They were slower than horses, they were expensive, they were impossible to maintain. They're all custom made, handcrafted by artisans in exacting ways that really weren't very useful. They were toys. They weren't tools. They were things that the super rich could use to show off how incredibly wealthy they were. They weren't used for anything. They were just there because other rich people had them. It wasn't until the Model T came out that cars actually got useful. How did that happen? Well, obviously the assembly line was a big deal, and it standardized all the parts, but also they stripped away all the stuff that didn't matter, all the decoration, the stylization, and the fussy stuff, the stuff that made it super expensive. They stripped it all out. By standardizing the design and production of the car, they made it accessible to way more people. Suddenly, it wasn't a toy, it was a tool. Employer branding is having something of a similar moment. Think about employer branding. It's expensive. Only the really rich companies can afford it. It's handcrafted by artisans. It's more toy than tool in a lot of ways. Maybe the TA team knows what to do with it. Maybe the marketing team knows what to do with it. But in a lot of cases, companies are just checking boxes. They're doing it because everybody else is doing it. Now, don't get me wrong. You know I love employer branding, and I have seen firsthand how many different ways a strong, well-activated employer brand can change companies for the better. That it does have real value, provided you treat it that way. So how do we make employer brand less of a toy and more of a tool? Well, a couple of steps. First, we standardize employer brand's purpose. Look, employer brand can be done a million different ways. It all depends on the resources, the tools, the skill sets you have available. So it's not so much about how you do employer branding, it's about what's the purpose and the goal of employer branding. We need to standardize on this idea that the goal of employer brand is to help people choose you over other companies. And that's a very specific choice of word. It's not about being the cheerleader. It's not saying wonderful things. It's about saying, look, this is who we are. This is how we do it. This is why you might choose us over other companies. Not why we're great, but why you make a choice. 2, it's all about standing out, not blending in. The company that blends in is a commodity company. Let's just be crystal clear about that. Employer brand exists to help the company stand out. Now, when you stand out, what do you stand out for? That's employer branding. Figuring that out, defining that, that's employer branding. But too many employer brands are all about saying nice things and then kind of fading into the woodwork or into the bush, Homer Simpson style, right? That's not what it's for. 3, focus on outcomes, not vibes. Too many employer brand and EVP projects are really about making people feel good, picking up the pom-poms and shaking them real hard to say, oh, here's why we're a wonderful place to work. That's not what it's there for. If you do it right, you start by focusing on an outcome, something you'd like to change. Whether it's about the company or about the perception, you want to make a specific change. When you focus on a specific change, well, suddenly you're accountable. You know if you've done it or not. You don't have to rely on NPS scores or Glassdoor to tell you if you are a nice company or people like working for you or whatever. It's about, did we solve this problem? Yes or no? That's good employer branding. 4, process, not projects. Too many employer brands are all about projects. To check the box, we did it, we built an EVP, QED, we're out the door. And that's problematic. You gotta focus on not the EVP, but how do you get every single person to understand the EVP, understand what it means to them, understand how they could communicate that out to the world, and align every piece to those ideas. It's a process, and I hate to tell you, it never ends. If we have our Model T moment, once we make employer brand actionable and accountable and effective, it changes the math. It changes all the recruiting math. When you start to attract people, qualify people your hire manager actually want to talk to, when you start drawing them in instead of having to chase them, think of how that changes your budgeting, your team structure, your purpose, your day. Good employer branding changes the rules altogether. And the last lesson for Model T is that once you do this, once you get your Model T moment, suddenly employer brand is a tool that almost any company can have access to. And it should be. It's not the toys for the rich and super cool companies. It's something every single company can and should be using. And once you start thinking of it as outcomes and not vibes, and you start thinking of it in terms of process and not projects, it is very much something within your grasp to make real change in your team and your entire company. That's the Model T moment.